Hey everybody. So today I'm going to finish talking about my career journey up until this point. In prior videos, I discussed my first role out of college, which was fictive. And then I transitioned into product management at Responsive Ads, and then went to ClassKick, an edtech app. And then I spent some time getting into website development, learning Webflow, got a design certificate through Dribble, and learned Figma pretty well. And then I took a role with a company called Sakari, which is an SMS app. It's in the HubSpot marketplace. And so it's a text message product, SaaS product for B2B use case. The main use cases were split between marketing and business operations. So on the marketing side, there's mass text messaging campaigns for a whole spectrum of company types, including both vertical that they work in, but also the size of companies. So we serviced startups and small businesses, but we also service some enterprise companies. Uh, on the business operations side, it's some use cases included like two-factor authentication, e-commerce updates on orders, and support use cases. Our customers were doing a lot of unique things with text messaging. If you have a product and you have questions on it, you could text and include the number of your like the product serial code, and that would triage internally with the business. It would triage to the correct representative to discuss that. But let's talk about the product and what I did there. So this was my first main like product launch. I would qualify as my one real success in product management thus far. It's an incredibly difficult career to get into product, and you kind of have to just claw your way into it until someone is until you build that credibility and you build some roles in it. And so startups is a perfect place to do that. What happens a lot in startups is, especially under pressure of VCs, they grow and then they seek talent outside externally. And so in a really high speed company, it's they what happens is they start to build out the product team uh, pretty slowly, and for that first hire, they don't want somebody who is inexperienced in product. They want somebody who has had some cuts and bruises. And so by the time I got to Sakari, that was me. But I built a lot more confidence and composure in leading meetings and working with engineers and influencing without authority. So for this conversation, I'm going to talk a lot more about because I have much more concrete experience in this role as a PM. I feel more comfortable speaking about the business problems and exactly how I was feeling and approaching them, and what worked well, what didn't work well. And I'll take you through that whole journey. So to begin, I was hired. I was the probably sixth to eighth employee, very small company, very chill set of co-founders. And I've always gotten through and have been hired with very streamlined processes, like through platforms like Wellfound, or this one was Underdog.io. And it wasn't a lot of testing or different steps in the hiring process. It was just a few conversations with the founders and teammates. And once I was hired, really the main goal was to rebuild the front end. And so they had a rough prototype of a instant messaging application with WebSockets, and it was a pretty substantial lift from the original app. They had already reached market fit. By the time I joined, they had a healthy amount of customers, and most of their customers came from HubSpot, so they developed an app in their ecosystem, and their competitive edge was text messaging specific use cases for marketing. The HubSpot ecosystem was it's a huge app. They service a large spectrum of customers, but they hadn't gotten into text messaging at that point. And we knew that they were going to get into it, but really in the strategic conversations that I had with the founders, we were really focused on this winning the heart of the user through design and through the user experience, because we knew that CRMs by nature, if you look at how they mature, they become a bit not blinded, but they don't have the agility to keep up with what new startups demand and what how the market changes and pivots. Text messaging became a huge opportunity, especially around during the pandemic, and for accessibility use cases. Like WhatsApp has a couple billion people using it, and in other countries they have restaurants. You can message the restaurant and somebody will get back to you, and that's how you make a reservation. So wildly different than here, but like text messaging is a huge use case in the US. But Apple Business Chat became a popular solution. And there was a startup called Nudge, SF, I think. They were heavily reliant on text messaging. They gave you recommendations via text message, and you could respond with like a number between 1 and 3, and then it would route you down sort of this conversation flow that was all automated, where it would provide you recommendations and link to like TikTok, short form videos to be more engaged in it. And so the idea, or in the kind of strategy level conversations that I had with the founders, like setting objectives, we wanted to have a really sticky inbox and try to lure in users from our primary channel of acquisition, which was through the HubSpot marketplace. And we had a number of other integrations like AirCall, and we had providers. So providers are where we got the phone numbers. So Twilio became the leader in toll-free messaging, and these services allow, through their API, you can purchase phone numbers, and then users can make use of that phone number to do the mass text message campaigns. But it became a really turbulent ecosystem, because there were compliance players that entered the space. Like the campaign registry was this neutral body that was established to ensure that companies who purchase a business phone number and then engage in mass text messaging campaigns, they suddenly had to register their business as well as the use case. If you have multiple use cases, you have to register each one. Otherwise, you could be limited by like carriers. And where it gets even more complex is like the way T-Mobile applies like filtering might be different from Verizon or AT&T. And so when you send the text stop, if you receive a message, then what happens is it's at the carrier level, and you get uh, sort of like banned from messaging that specific phone number again. And so it blocks the phone number. So the app that we were developing was an inbox, and we wanted initially the version 1 product had it was built with like Google's design system, like the stock design assets, and it was built by my CTO, and he doesn't have a design background, so it looked like an engineer built it, and we had that explicit feedback from customers, which was funny. But I really enjoyed working for those founders. They were incredibly flexible and allowed me to really develop into a leader and and take the reins and influence the direction of the product. And so I had a lot of ownership. I had the ability to work cross-functionally and hire out like our design team. We started with a contract designer who was a recommendation from my friend at OpenTable. And then we had a few learnings from that contract designer. That contract designer was very experienced, and some of the things that I really picked up were just the underlying like principles of design and why you hire a designer and what value they have to bring to the table. I remember one key learning in specific, like as a product manager, you're a lot of times you're balancing, competing interests, and you have to up manage. And for me, having a CTO as my direct manager increased the difficulty. And because as a product person by nature, your interests are sometimes at odds with your technology heads. And so our designer, one of the things, like there were several times where our CTO would want to add features, like almost like duplicate them in different areas, where it does have like a valid reason behind it. Like you want to add this feature in this location because it's more convenient for the user to have it since they're already in this area of the product. But the design perspective that this person like gave me and really opened my eyes was that you want to develop a mental like form a mental habit, a mental model of how the product works and where to go to do things. And that can really reduce your tech debt that you introduce. You don't actually want to just build features for that convenience. You want to really layer the functionality and what features you can access. Like another simple example is like anything destructive. Like if you're deleting something, instead of having the trash can like in the main UI, like nest it in a menu, like a ellipsis or something like that, because you want it to be more of a secondary, tertiary type of action. And so that really helped me develop this perspective of like having, where do features sit like in the hierarchy? Is it something that should go in the navigation? Is it something, and proximity comes into play here, like just all principles. And so like and heuristics as well. So like where are people more accustomed to seeing these types of actions, and where do they go to look to do things, right? By familiarity with other products, and what's a chance to, what's an opportunity to be creative and do something different, versus when should you not be as creative and do what everyone else is doing. So all of these principles of design and like strategies, like they came from the designer. And like unless you really like open your eyes to, you know, the education and the experience and all of the training that they go through, you'll miss out on some of the things that really make people fall in love with your product. I know the like CPO of Figma has really championed the idea that people, like in a world where you know, every product, it's so easy to build something, and it's a very competitive, very crowded market for most apps. And typically the winners, um, uh, their strategic differentiation a lot of times lies in the design choices. And so in an ecosystem with a ton of competitors, the apps that really put a lot of time into the design principles and the theory of design, you know, all of these really important, like empathizing with the user and studying the pain points of that user, and giving them the most polished experience that they've ever seen. Those are the apps that really come out on top. Um, and it's really about like winning the heart of the user. It's like if you think of like Simon Sinek, TED Talk from a long time ago, like people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Uh, like like you win them, you sell them on your your vision of the world and your vision of the future, um and then they'll buy anything from you, right? It's not like, here's a product, do you want to buy it? It's, do you believe what I believe? uh I just happen to sell this product. And it's a much more effective way of growing your business when you frame it like that. So I have a lot of like some of that like foundation and leadership and listening to people like that. But uh, we so in that role, I had a lot of learnings and practice like with those competing interests of like engineering versus design. And you can't win it all. Like a lot of times you have to just let the CTO drive or let your founders make the decision if you're moving really fast. But up managing became a really important skill in these conversations, and just really trying to shield the designer and their credibility. And we ended up, I don't want to say losing that designer, but that contract designer like didn't convert to a full-time role. And part of my analysis of that is because we were moving very quickly, and it turned into a bit of pixel pushing where it's like we have opinions that are beyond our ceiling of what we should be in control of as business stakeholders. So product managers are a key person in dictating what are the swim lanes, what decisions are everybody supposed to be making, like who is, even if it's the founder, like you don't overstep and say, uh, no, it's not your decision, it's the designer's decision. You say, hey, look, here's another way of thinking about this. I really value your idea, but you have too many ideas. No, you say, I value your idea, but here are some more grounded like assumptions that led to the designer's way of thinking. And a lot of times as a product manager, you need to align yourself to a person who is the expert, and think about how can you see what motivates them, see where they're coming from, empathize with your own internal stakeholders, and champion them and help them be successful. And so you devise a small plan of like, how can I get this person to win the buy-in that they need and the influence they need to have their idea be absorbed into the product. And you do that across functions. You do that with customer support. You do that with sales. And that's how you really keep each team excited about what you're building. You don't put up walls and say, this is product and engineering doing it for a year and a half, and then you try to train sales and marketing on how the product works. I was pretty diligent about documenting, and I did everything in Notion. Like we had a Gantt chart. We had two things. We had the roadmap, which is like what we were developing, and then in parallel, we had the launch plan, which was also time-based, but it allowed us to look at like development work and the progress of the product differently than the goal and objective of launching something. So it doesn't have to be the whole product that we launch, but we need to meet deadlines on the launch targets. So we had the Gantt chart for the roadmap. Each item had a PRD, typically like in an organization where you're the first product manager. It's a it depends on how many features you're building, but for me, I found it most comfortable to be like an area of product work that is like it's too big to be just one feature. Like if it's just one feature, you don't need to write out all the hypotheses and a list of assumptions and all of that. Like you're moving too fast for that. If it's an enormous amount of work, like a launch plan, for an entire front end, that also isn't a PRD. But a PRD it's what you are building, and it's some of the why. And that why depends on, the scale of company, the amount of certainty you have in it. If it's something highly certain, why do you spend a lot of time doing all these hypotheses and experimenting? And, everybody says prototyping is so critical for product managers, but, it's like you don't need to test things if you have the intuition to know it's correct and can get everybody on board with it, right? You can be more strategic and say, okay, I got everybody's buy-in. I don't need to do a little test on it. And I learned that at like, doing the support chat thing at ClassKick. It's like pick and choose your battles, pick and choose what's going to make the most impact for the company. And it's usually what your heart is telling you, like what you think would be like the dream product, um, or the vision you have. If you're a big picture thinker or design thinker, I sort of come from that mindset and the marketing side. Like that is probably easier to get buy-in on, and you'll be more excited in influencing people. And so your chance of success doing things like that are creative uh, risks, but the trade-off is you are more comfortable in your role. You're going to have a better outcome than if you go for really tiny things that you can be successful in, and no one's going to care. Um, the so back to the Gantt chart. So we had PRDs. A PRD was a feature set. So like we had like one body of work. We started with the rebuilding the experience for contacts. So a contacts database similar to like a Notion style, the ability uh, message individual contacts from that, add new contacts, delete contacts, block, um, and then bulk actions, being able to start a campaign from multi-selecting contacts. And then we got into list building. So we had audience lists. One learning I really kind of fought this and it wasn't worth it. We originally had a tagging system. There were some issues with it. And so, but I kind of took the leap and said, hey, I was really inspired by what Ordo, I think, did. Autopilot turned into Ordo. Um, and their approach with they had a visual like canvas workflow product, and I wanted to align um, towards that. And we ended up, so I proposed like we switched to this list structure for like just deprecate the tagging system, move everybody to lists, um, and then have like marketing lists, and you can hook those up to campaigns. Where that got really messy is later in the product launch when we were um, building out features for like campaigns, and we had in migrating users, like we had used like I didn't look too deeply into how people were using tags, and and some of the issues we had were like, oh well, the list that when you create a campaign in the new product, you couldn't hook up more than one list. And so what are we going to do with the customers who have campaigns that are already running? And you could have a campaign that was like transactional. You have something like a one time, like send to 100,000 contacts, or you could have a campaign that was running at a cadence. So like there was a there was like a waste management company that reminded people of their day that the garbage truck would arrive in like Montana, and it would be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and also it would be segmented by the location, like city. It was a very few amount of customers that were using multiple tags per campaign, and that sort of like um, cadence type of campaign. But it was a blind spot for me, and it wasn't, I didn't do a thorough enough job in validating the use case. It turned into a messy engineering migration problem towards the when it was most stressful, when we were trying to also establish the marketing plan, uh, do a rollout, communicate to customers, take in feedback on bugs. Like if you're investing in a full new front end and migrating 10,000 users, you want to be very choiceful in what features you deprecate, which ones you keep, and which ones become the incentive for transitioning your new features. So that was a learning. we started with the contacts, and then we moved to campaigns. Then we went into like self-service checkout of a phone. We had a way for the user to start a free trial, and then that workflow in the free trial changed with regulation. So there were API changes quite frequently, new requirements from the campaign registry, which was that neutral body. And I also went to trade shows and listened in on how the industry was changing. And that's a big part of the role, always being in tune with the discussions and what competitors are doing, gathering competitive intelligence. After the checkout experience, we sort of moved towards building out a workflow product. That was a gigantic project for engineering. And if I were to go back and if I had more say in it, I would have deprioritized it so that we could do the rollout quicker, because we just didn't have enough engineering resources to keep up with the bugs we were seeing in the new interface and having a beta program. I designed the launch plan, so that included like cohorts of users and what dates we were going to start opening up the new experience for them and getting feedback. And I did a bunch of videos on it, put some marketing material together. The workflow product was triggers and actions based, like a setup webhooks type of experience. And you could do some really powerful things. You could triage like contacts that went through that. And we got into analytics associated with that. We had a really cool way of viewing the contacts that go through a workflow. You could see the number, like you're looking at the design of the workflow. You could see like exactly the number of contacts that succeeded through a workflow action and failed, and what that failure message was. It was a really beautiful design. The new designer that we hired after the contract designer did an incredible job with that. And that was a massive undertaking, because like designing a workflow app in Figma with like, when you have the user remove one of those actions, and it's one action that goes into three actions. You delete one of them, then you want it to look more symmetric, and the two that still exist need to like shift over. So that, how does the layout respond to that functionality? Yeah, we had a ton of interesting elements, like a choice element. They would have like a multiple choice survey type of thing, and they would text a keyword and that would push them down a different route. So you have like conditions that change their path. And then versioning. So what I had some experience from Webflow and working at Responsive Ads on, like through the variant system that I helped out with there, had a really nice way of like reviewing older versions of your workflow design and then restoring that version. And I got to learn some of the technical dependencies and that type of experience and how that worked with our backend. And then we also got into voice. So I talked with taxation software calculators and helped to qualify partners for that. We wanted to pass on tax liability to the user because it's based on the local judiciary, like zip code level. I think that was because like telephone lines that are used in Nexus, and that was exciting. I did schematics on like how that tax would be calculated and then pushed to the invoice, and we used Stripe checkout. So the free trial experience changed very abruptly, and it was like all of the sudden compliance bodies said, okay, we're not going to allow, there's a big push for what's called 10DLC, which is 10-digit long code. That was getting everybody to register their campaigns and use cases. That was difficult to manage from a product perspective, all the whiplash and changes. We had to design a free trial experience. We push people down the path of like you sign up, you purchase a phone, and then you test it in the app, but you could only test if it wasn't registered and compliant, then you could only message yourself through like a two-factor type of experience. So that aha moment got really shrunken down to the user just being able to message themselves and see if that worked. And I became burned out because I spent a lot of time trying to oversee the cross-functional deadlines of marketing and customer support. I got myself into a hole a bit. This was my first big product launch, being the only product manager at a company. I don't think I did a good enough job championing the marketing side of things and helping to grow their knowledge of the product and support and sales. Like I documented a lot about each feature set that we were doing, but I didn't have enough like cross-functional meetings to really train, and I didn't have a lot of time to do that. We spent like a year and a half, which is a long time for doing a launch. And so I would have wanted to shorten that more, get it out there, and then put the workflow product behind that launch instead of doing it in parallel. But I think from a business leader perspective, it's a way to invest in areas like emerging opportunities. They knew we wanted to get into a workflow product, and it would take a lot of time to work through the headache of all those features and get a foundation for that. But I needed to put more pressure on and say that like we don't have enough engineering resources to cover the bugs that we're seeing every day in the beta interface. And so that's a learning from that, like up managing. So a user story, I still do I like to do user stories because it feels more human, and it gives you that it's easy to picture as anybody in the organization, and it's more engaging to read a PRD that way, and to empathize with users and see how the product works in your head. But I would have like the user story. I need the ability to create a contact so that I can message my favorite people, for example. And then you would have a set of functional requirements which are tied to engineering. It's how it works from a product person perspective, you're trying to capture the most definition with the least amount of explaining. And so it doesn't have to be, you don't want to bleed into engineering or design too much and say, you have to do it this way, or you have to write this algorithm to do it. So, some product leaders might fight me on that, and they would say, I'm not experienced because they don't. And it's true. I don't know how the back end works. That's something I'm constantly working on as somebody who doesn't come from that area of expertise. But you want to give enough information that can communicate what you expect out of the product and out of engineering and out of design. So I would do functional requirements, which was really like user presses button and has fields to add first name, last name, email, phone number. And then you might have requirements on the phone number that, like, where engineering won't be happy is if you don't do enough work to understand the depth of what you're asking for. Anything you can provide to help with error validation is helpful. But if you're moving really fast and you don't have a lot of people, sometimes that can be engineering's responsibility. So there's no clear answer to who's responsible for, if the field didn't give a message when the user put in letters into the phone number box and clicked save. Like, I would, in the size of our organization, that for me, that fault would be on the engineer. It's not the product person didn't write it in the spec, so we're not going to do it. It's the assumption that, like, this is something that you should be setting up as an engineer. You should be following standard practices and taking off-the-shelf components to do simple things like that. So that's where you want to be very firm as a product person. So in addition to the functional requirements, so I would like to have each functional requirement tied to a piece of success criteria. So, like, that's how you can really measure engineering on their performance fulfilling that functional requirement. Like, it needs to, how do you know if the button to create contact works? Well, it should bring up a light box or a fly-in panel that has fields for that. And then where design comes in is, like, you don't want to say how it needs to look. You want to tell a designer where to focus their time, like where you need designs and where you don't need designs. Error validation is a great one. Like, how do the errors look? What does a field look like when there's errors? And even that, I would say, like, designers are trained to know all the states of form fields. And if I didn't put that in there, I would also be firm on that. This is something that is fundamental to design. I would link the Figma designs to functional criteria. Context was one. The contact feature of creating a new contact was one A. And then under A, I would have functional requirements. So it was like 1A.1, 1A.2, 1A.3. And then I would link that to designs, and the frames in Figma would be, like, linked to that. So each design mock, one or two screens, would explain the behavior of one of those functional requirements. So you have, like, an explanation from the design side, and that's input for the engineering team. And they need to see that in the spec. So they could easily just work from the product spec, the PRD, and go through those functional requirements and have all of the information that they need to do something. I would also embed, like, any criteria that came from, like, regulatory bodies or API requirements. And then when you have that PRD complete, I would have a couple reviews with my CTO, and once I got his sign off, I would we would send it to engineering. They would do it, and then they would do a deployment to staging. So the staging environment was a place where I would test, so the product person, because it's you made a request for a cross-functional team to do something. Now you're grading them on it. You're saying, does it meet your requirements? And so you go through each criteria. And then once they gave the go-ahead on how it worked in staging environment, we would deploy to production. So that was a system that worked for us. We also had, like, a design board that was separate from this to keep them ahead of some of the specification work. So There's ideation of design, and then product definition was happening at the same time. But then I would request design for more well-defined work and to fulfill more specific criteria that I had. And then there were also repolish things. So we would have Jira tickets that were of different types. You could have a bug, you could have a new feature, and we had a polish item, which was like a lower priority. Often we're not going to write any, like we would just take screenshots of the platform, send it, like circle it, redline it, and then send it via ticket, Jira ticket, and have the designer look at it. And then once the designer would finish making a change, they would upload that to the Jira ticket, and then the engineer would carry out the rest of the work and then finalize it. And then it would come back to me, and I would approve and close out the Jira ticket if it met the criteria. So yeah, we had a lot of systems. We also had like a feature voting, public board with Canny, Zendesk tickets. We had a lot of automation, LogRocket for session recordings. And what was great was having that integrated with Zendesk. So somebody has a complaint or an issue, you could very quickly access the session data and see where they got stuck. And then some AI analysis, event tracking at the like the button level. So you could see in LogRocket like what buttons were defective or not working for people, and any like console errors that people were getting. Yeah, that's a pretty good summary of how I set things up. We were pretty successful, I think, in getting the users migrated to the new product. I ran the beta program, started with like 20 users, had some feedback cycles with them on video calls, and then we expanded to let 100 people, then 200, then 500. And we had to balance enterprise versus, like, I wanted a good diversity of use cases involved with the early stages of the product, but we had like performance issues. Some of our customers had 100,000 contacts, like from HubSpot syncing with the new interface. We couldn't let them in the new interface at the beginning, even though they're, maybe our most trusted customers. Because of these, it would be embarrassing for us to do that. Like, it wasn't in a working state for them, but it would work for small companies. So those were some of the decisions that we had to make. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview. I can't really think of anything else. But yeah, so that completes my like product journey to this point. Now I'm going to continue to talk about product and like philosophy and what I've learned. In future videos, I'm also going to get into some more day-to-day things. So you'll see more videos from me, but I can't promise what they're going to be about. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks.